Yes.
Hello, everybody. Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Glover. I'm the member of the Department of Design for York. Thank you for coming out to our housing that you need at Town Hall. And before we get too far into it, I would like to start with the land acknowledgement. So I acknowledge that we are on the traditional territories of many nations, including the Mississaugas, the Credit, and Anishinaabe, the Mississauga, there's the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people. And this land continues to be the home of many Inuit, Métis, and other First Nations people. And I'd also like to acknowledge that this is that Toronto was covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississauga for the Credit. And today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous peoples from across Carolina. We're grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. And when we talk about this land is still home to many people from across Carolina, I think that's really important because today we're talking about homes and the need for affordable housing, which is an absolute crisis in this province right now. I'm going to be introducing our panelists. We've got some excellent panelists. I was talking to some of you beforehand. I know you have many questions, but right now there's just a fairly high level of anxiety around housing. Anybody who's got rental housing in the city is terrified of being evicted. Because if they get evicted, they're not sure that they're going to be able to afford something. I was working with a group of seniors in Mississauga who are in a Chartwell Seniors apartment building, and they evicted all 200 seniors from that building because Chartwell, which is subsidized by the government, it's got $65 million in subsidies to run long-term care homes from the government since 2006. They are selling and into one vacant possession so they can renovate and increase the rent. And one of the people they evicted is 102 years old, and so we need a different kind of housing, and we need not to be in control of real estate development. The reason we have a crisis in housing in this province is due to public policy, and the solution can come from public policy. And that's what our three advocates, our three panels, are here to talk about. The kind of policies that we need to make in order to make housing affordable in Ontario again. Because it is possible. We've done this before. Before the Second World War, there were very large slums in downtown Toronto, some of the largest slums in North America. And after the Second World War, when the soldiers came back, they lived through the Depression, they lived through the Second World War, and they said, hey, we're not going to put up with this anymore. We want housing, we want access to university, we want employment insurance, we want public health care, we want to be unionized so that our employers are taking advantage of it. And all of those things happened. And it created the largest middle class that we never had between the 1970 to started diminished about 1990 when all those policies started be on roll. But housing was a key post-war World War II policy. They started building warehouses. Raise your hand if you know what a warehouse is. Okay, quite a few people. And I gotta say, it's really impressive that not everybody who raised their hand has great. And Steve can say that and nobody is great. But they started to build those. They were building 17,000 public housing units a year. Co-ops, social housing, supportive housing, right up till 1995. And in that time, the federal Liberal Party canceled the national housing program. So that brought it into that, and then at the provincial level, they downloaded housing onto the city. So what had been Ontario housing was downloaded to became Toronto community housing. But what we need now is we need housing for everyone. We've got a homelessness crisis across the province. There are 10 encampments in every city in this province. We need to make sure that everybody has a home. And we also need to make sure that the homes are affordable. And so we need not just, housing, supportive housing for people with mental illness, with disabilities, or people who get then evicted. We need housing for everyone. This includes middle income people, because a lot of middle income people can no longer afford housing, or all of their money, their entire paycheck goes to rent. And then they don't have enough for food, they don't have enough for the other essentials. So we need to address this housing crisis. And then the good part is we've solved it before, and we can solve it again. And that's what our panelists are here to talk about. Some of the solutions And the reason that we call this town hall is it's good to have the solution, but we need the political will to make them happen, to implement. And that's where I'm going to be calling on you to help us build that political momentum to get affordable housing built, not just here in Toronto, but across the country. That's the role that we're going to be talking about towards the end of the meeting. If we want to come out here with some action that each of us can take to get affordable housing, because it is possible, we know we can do it. So with that, I'm going to introduce you to our first panel. Mike LeVay is going to be talking about ownership co-op. Mike founded the Options Group of Companies in 1992 and is currently the president and CEO of a company called Home Opportunity. He's been involved in the production of affordable housing and options for homes, has provided homes to over 6,500 households across Canada. So Mike, why don't you tell people what you've been working on?
Good, this is where yes. Okay. I prefer to stand because I sometimes taste excited. I have 5 minutes to go through something that I'm. So I'm going to give you a flavor. I'll play afterwards and answer some questions if you would like. I do want to sort of try to focus on a housing solution. Too many times we focus on how to produce housing and try to produce a specific type of housing. And if we're going to do that, we have to stand back and say, can this actually be a housing solution? So I want to give you a couple of information that might be useful. I'm going to then give you the solution in a nutshell, and then you can choose it. But yeah, there are ways to support this and make sure that the city is doing something totally intelligent rather than what it's doing at this point in time. First and foremost, in 1975, every single housing program costs more money to produce less units. Now, I realize that that's a bit of a problem. Right? Secondly, if we were going to solve the housing problem exclusively through rental subsidies, we would only need to find $1.2 trillion. Ridiculous. Federal budget is about $300 or $400 billion. So if we shut down the federal government for 2 years, we could have a comprehensive housing solution. Or it actually work on a comprehensive housing solution. What do we need for a comprehensive housing solution? First and foremost, we have to do what everybody has been saying all along. We need all hands on deck. Everybody has to contribute something to the solution. The issue is who can capital. That's the biggest decision that you have to make is who's going to guide the ship. Because if you ask the government to guide the ship, they hit the rock too many times. They have the support, but they can't manage. If you want it to be charities, that's all and good because they would focus primarily on supportive housing, which is a good place to be, but it's not a comprehensive solution. If you want the private sector to do it, the problem would already be solved. You wouldn't have to. Okay. So it has to be a non-profit capital. But the non-profit has to be willing to partner with every component of the housing sector and focus on it effectively. So for instance, when we worked with a contractor, they worked with a 10% margin rather than 20%. So we cut their margin by giving them a guaranteed price. We have a dozen real estate agents that will sell our units for $1,000 per sale. That alone saves 4% of the cost. So every participant is controlled by the nonprofit captain to make sure the ship is going towards the housing solution. That's the first one. So what we've done is created a cooperative homeownership center that takes all the good solutions that the co-op can come up with and tailors them to provide a housing solution for the country. Next step is obviously, as I said, we can't solve the housing problem through grants and subsidies. In fact, we need every dollar of government money we have, Chris, to support housing, because that's who's dying on the streets. And for us to poach that money to give it to middle class people when we don't need to is criminal, right? Because people are dying on the streets and they need that money. So what we need is a solution that doesn't need grants and stuff, which means, unfortunately, this drives bureaucrats crazy. We have to allow low-income people a chance to own homes in this city. And that's awful because low-income people haven't worked hard enough to deserve to own a home in this city. and they should be tenants. That's where they should be, right? So let's find the $1.2 trillion and I'll shut up, right? Okay. So ownership is the key. Now, the ownership has to work for lower income people. And I'll get to that quickly, and Chris will cut me off when he wants to cut me off. I'm not quite at 5. And so what we need to do then is make sure that what we build, we can actually sell. Because this city's not no longer building as much housing as it could because they can't sell units because they're trying to sell them to a higher price. So what we've done is we've taken the strength of the complaint that housing has been financialized, and we've found investors, obviously within the co-op sector, called credit unions, who will lend money and not collect it until you sell. So I can sell you a $500,000 home and you'll carry a $200,000 mortgage. So I can match the carrying cost of your mortgage to your income. Then when you sell, I'll take that money, build another house for someone else. So you'll sell into the market, you'll make money and generational wealth on the portion of the home that you actually own. And the more you own, the more you make. So when you get married and have a husband to help you raise your kids, you can get more of your house and pass that money on to someone else. The last piece of the puzzle is that we need to build twice as much housing as we're currently building. We do not have enough construction workers to build twice as much housing. So we're stuck. And as fast as we train them, they're retiring because they're very old. So getting the numbers to double is impossible. So there's a very straightforward solution. You have to build 50% of all housing in factories. So you build factory components, you install them on site, you double the capacity of the current trades to build housing. And now you've got the volume that you can and you need to build. Now that all sounds simple. I've been around a long time. I know solutions are easy. It's implementation that's hard. So the city of Toronto has got to stop making every single building totally unique. Because you can't build components in a factory if every single thing is different. There has to be some designs that are repeated over and over again, even though the outside of the building looks different. So there's solutions, but as I say, all hands on deck, everybody has to participate. And so what you can do is to say to the City of Toronto, set aside every single acre of land that you can for affordable rental housing, get as much subsidy dollars as you possibly can, but stop throwing away 3/4 of your land to the private sector, because having the private sector build on government land does not produce another single unit. Because the private sector only builds as much as it can sell. So if it sells units on government land, it's poaching units from private land. You're not getting any extra units. So all of those units have to go to affordable ownership that pays market value for land and has a mechanism to allow for people as low as $35,000 a year. 2 to 3% of our units are intended to go to people on minimum wage so they can own in this damn city. That's our goals. That's what we're trying to do. And do one thing for me and for Chris and for everybody else here. If you have a choice between renting for $100 a month, and owning for $1,060 a month, do you want to be a renter? Hands up who wants to be a renter. Okay, we have somebody who's very fixated on it, because of course ownership destroys society and ruins everybody's lives. But most of us prefer to be homeowners. That's the way our society is structured. That's how we build generational wealth for our kids. That's how we move ahead as a family. And it's very difficult if you can't leave anything to your children beyond time. Okay. Thank you, Chris, for giving me a few extra minutes.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Let's give a round of applause, everybody. Okay, so I'm sure that Michael spurred a lot of thoughts and probably some questions. We're going to come back to them. We're going to have our other speakers speak first, and then we're going to open. I've got a few questions that I'll ask from that people have sent in already, and then we'll open it up to the floor for questions. Let's see. Oh, I almost forgot to mention in my intro remarks. July 6th, this Saturday, is International Co-op Day. And that's why we're having this housing town hall tonight, because it is International Co-op Day, and we need to build more co-op housing. So that's what we're trying to do. Okay. Our next speaker is Celia Chandler. So Mike was talking about ownership co-ops. Celia's going to talk about rental co-ops, and Celia began her career in the clerk's department at the City of Toronto. What's that?
I gave her my co-op.
Oh, yeah? Oh, okay, I'll pass it over. Let's see. Celia began her career in the clerk's department at the City of Toronto, but has worked for 2 decades now in the affordable housing sector. First as a lawyer in a small Toronto firm, and now first as a lawyer in a small Toronto law firm, and now as the Deputy Executive Director of the Co-op Housing Federation of Toronto. When she's not doing her part for the housing crisis, she's sitting in her Toronto laneway suite, blogging and writing on a book. So Celia, before you get any remarks, tell us about the book that you're writing.
Well, I would like to say the book is on housing, but it's not actually. No, I'm writing a book on reinvention because, as you can tell from my intro, I've changed careers a couple of times, and I think lots of us, once we get locked into a career, sometimes feel like the doors are closed to get out of it. I want to spread the word that that is not true. So thank you for inviting me to talk about something that I'm very passionate about, which is co-op housing. So I work for the Cooperative Housing Federation of Toronto, or CHFT as it's known. We are a membership organization of 185 housing co-ops, mostly in Toronto, but some of them are in York Region and Durham. And they house about 50,000 people. So a considerable chunk of people live in our housing co-ops. We're a 50-year-old organization this year, which is very exciting. We're celebrating that. And I suspect there are people in the room who actually live here in Bathurst Quay in some of the housing co-ops here. So you'll know quite a bit about CHFT, I'm sure. But for those who don't, I want to talk a little bit about what housing co-ops, what nonprofit housing co-ops are all about. So I like to think of them as a bit of a mashup of rental housing and condominium living, condominium ownership. So we're like rental housing in that the people who live there pay a monthly fee in exchange for living there. In rental housing, we call it rent. In co-ops, we call it a housing charge. But it's got this twist. It's like a condo because everyone who lives there elects a board of directors, and that board of directors handles the management or hires a manager to manage the affairs of the corporation. So that creates a bit of autonomy for the people who live there. We don't call them tenants, we call them members, which creates a further distinction from rental housing. And the governance is done in the framework of the 7 internationally recognized co-op principles, which include things like education, one member, one vote, all of these important principles that we're going to celebrate on Saturday with International Co-op Day. But we as co-opers celebrate them every day. They're our guiding principles. So what do we do at CHFT? Well, we provide a range of membership services. So we provide support to boards who are governing the housing co-ops. We do things like diversity scholarships for people who are pursuing post-secondary education within those communities. We also administer a number of land trust corporations, including the one that owns the Bathurst Quay co-ops. Which is a very exciting, the land trust model is a very exciting way of ensuring that these properties are always kept in the non-market world. So there's nobody out there who owns the land who could suddenly decide, as somebody, you were talking, Chris, about Chartwell deciding to sell to another landlord and suddenly evicting a bunch of people. That can't happen when a co-op is on land trust-owned land. And the other exciting aspect of that is once those mortgages are paid off, then for some of the lease arrangements that the land trust has, there are rents then paid back into the sector that help with capital improvements, but also help with developing more co-ops. So I know you want to talk about, or want to hear about, the exciting moment we have in history now where we have a new co-op housing development program, and that was announced by the federal government back on June 7th. And the details are certainly available on the website, and I can answer questions about them tonight. But essentially, it is a pot of $1.5 billion, which will be available for the development of new housing co-ops across the country. There's an application window that will open in a week or so on July 15th, which will allow potential co-op developers to apply to have access to this money. And we at CHFT, you may know, we're part of a partnership with a private sector developer in the city of Toronto to develop some land at the Kennedy subway station, 2444 Eglinton. And that will be one project that we hope will be funded through that co-op housing development program. And I can talk a lot more about that project if people are interested. I think the only other thing I wanted to let you know is that the City of Toronto developed a close partnership with CHFT last fall when they decided to enter into an agreement with us to provide $400,000 to help with pre-development costs on new co-op housing development, and another $100,000 to help us support existing co-ops. So we see that as a real recognition on the city's part that they're serious about co-op housing and the creation of more co-op housing in the city, and we're really excited about that. So that's it. I'm sorry if I went over.
No, that was great. Thank you, Julie. Raise your hand if you are in the audience here, if you live in a co-op. Quite a few. Okay, keep your hands up for a second. Now, the rest of you who don't have your hands up, raise your hand if you would be interested in possibly living in a co-op. Oh, okay, that's like 98% of the people in the room here. Okay, so people are very interested in co-op housing as a possibility. And our next speaker, actually all of our speakers are going to be talking about this as a possibility. We'll open up to questions after this, but Michael Norris is our next speaker. He's going to be speaking on current co-op housing projects in Toronto. And Michael is a senior director at Impact Ontario, a co-op provincial association that does a considerable amount of co-op development across the province, including housing. He is currently working on 4 housing projects, 2 of which are co-ops. Michael, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chris. And I do just want to say it's such an honor to be on this panel with giants who I admire. And I'm really sorry. I really try not to date you guys, but you know, I really do admire the work that you guys have done in just trailblazing cooperative development, and because it's because of people like you that I'm in the cooperative space now, and I call myself a scrappy cooperative developer. I worked at Impact ON, and Impact ON, you probably have not heard of us because we started as a Francophone organization, and we still are a Francophone organization, so all of the staff that we have at our office at Richmond and Spadina speak French, but we also speak English, and we work in both languages. We were started in 1964 by Caisse Populaire Desjardins, so you may have heard of the Desjardins Credit Union, and one of the reasons that we were started by them was to be an organization for cooperative development, not just in housing, but cooperative development in Ontario as a whole. I think some of you who know cooperatives well may know that Quebec is an absolute powerhouse when it comes to cooperatives and cooperative development. And within the Francophone community in Ontario, we like to consider ourselves co-op development powerhouses as well. So if you do like co-ops, if you drink the Kool-Aid, well then there's no better cheese curd than the Coopérative Saint-Albert. You can get them in your local grocery store. I'm a huge cheese guy, so those are great. But again, I'm not here to talk about cooperative cheese. I'm here to talk about housing. I think what I just wow, thank you. I really try to be sincere, but that one was yeah, it was. I set you up and you slap shot at home, so congratulations. I think for me, I'm working on a couple of cooperative housing development projects, and they're some of the first, I hope, of many in my career. And I've been working in the space since 2021, so I'm pretty new and I'm pretty green, and I've learned from a lot of mistakes that I have made or others have made. But 2 of the projects that I'm working on, one is in North York, it's at Bayview and Finch, and it's on the property of an old church. And then there's another one in Scarborough that I'm working on, that if you know Scarborough well, kind of in the Markham and Ellesmere area, on another church property. And I think what I've learned from those 2 examples that I'll speak to this evening is that, and from what I've been told, sorry I wasn't there, but in the 1970s there was tremendous amounts of goodwill, you know, in bringing cooperative development, cooperative housing to fruition. There was a lot of people who were banding together as a community and solving this need together. And that's what cooperatives are. They're communities banding together to solve this need. It's not us just sitting there and looking at the government and being like, you solve our problems for us. No, we're gonna solve our problems for ourselves. And so I think, you know, when I just look at those cooperative development projects that I've been on where there's been success, there's been community involvement, community engagement. And I applaud all of you who, you know, live in a cooperative, who contribute to your cooperative, who are on boards in your cooperatives, because I think, you know, one of the things that I want to share with you this evening that I'm seeing is that there really is a crisis of governance in some cooperatives and nonprofit housing as well, where we do see, you know, some people retiring from their positions on boards with tremendous experience and wealth, and those positions are just not being filled or backfilled by young people like me. So that's a real crisis. I know that there are some nonprofit housing providers, and I can't speak necessarily for some of the cooperative housing, but maybe Cecilia, you can, that do have the resources to be able to build, to be able to expand and to get the job done, and that the governance is sitting in the way. It's actually people having the energy and having the goodwill to be able to get those projects across the finish line. And so I guess my message for you is get involved in cooperative housing. And even if you're not, like you don't live in a cooperative, there may be a nonprofit housing provider in your community. Check the obligations to join the member of their board. Volunteer with them, contribute. Because the reality is that we're going to need everyone we can get if we're going to make this work, okay? And I think that, you know, for some people it may seem far away, but there's a City of Toronto website where you can join a board and get governance training, right? This is something where you need to get involved and you need to volunteer if you really want to see the change.
What you just said?
Yeah, I will provide it. No, not to worry. I have plenty of notes here. We can talk after. But join a board, get that governance experience. It doesn't matter where you start, and that will be critical to solving this housing crisis that we are all facing right now.
So we asked people to send some questions in advance, and we'll start with a few of those, and then we'll open it up to the floor. Let's see. So, and I'll open this to either any of you, Mike, Michael, or Celia. What is the difference between rental and ownership co-ops? Go ahead.
Sure. So a rental co-op, which is the kind that my organization represents, no, you don't have to buy in to be a member. You're simply paying a monthly fee to live there, which we call housing charge. There are ownership co-ops, which we call equity co-ops, where you actually there's a purchase price attached to the occupancy of a unit, and then when you decide to leave that unit, then you sell that unit on the real estate market. And it's a similar process to selling a condo, but there's sometimes restrictions on purchasing an equity co-op unit. And Mike will want to say a word about it too, I know.
And then there are development cooperatives. And development cooperatives are cooperatives that are building a condominium unit for each of their members. So the cooperative acts as a developer, and the end result is a condominium ownership by each of its members. So you have a normal title situation in the marketplace, which allows you to be actively a member of a condominium. What's different for our condominiums is you can't buy, we only sell to owner occupants. So there's no access to investors, and so that helps. But we also do, like all cooperatives, we have meetings of the purchasers' members throughout the development process. So you move into a building where you know all your neighbors, and that, of course. So our buildings are known as the buildings where people talk to each other on the elevators. So that's the third type of cooperative. The usefulness of that cooperative is that it has an overarching multi-stakeholder cooperative that provides financing to allow the whole system to work.
And actually, there is in our riding a development co-op in the distillery district. You know where the Big Heart is? And okay, the building just to the south of that, that's the development co-op that was built by Options for Homes, if I'm right.
70, 80 Mill Street and 39 Parliament, they launched the distillery district. I'm very proud to say.
Okay, nice. Yes, and I know several people who live there, and yes, you live there. Okay, nice. Okay, how are you an original owner? No. Okay.
I'm pretty close to the area, actually.
Yeah. Okay, but the original owners that I know, they said they got in, and it cost about a third less than a for-profit condo. You know, and it's a beautiful building. It's got, you know, nice. It's gorgeous. Like, it's a great space, and it's affordable. And people do, like, there is a real sense of community in that building. Okay. My next question: what kind of housing will be built under the cooperative program? Detached townhomes, low-rise apartments, condos. Anybody want to tackle that one? Michael?
I mean, the program in itself doesn't really discriminate, so long as it's a cooperative. It can be an Indigenous-owned cooperative, it can be a multi-stakeholder cooperative, but so long as it's a cooperative, you're eligible for, what is it, the $1 billion in loans, and then the other $500 million is I think towards grants and assessments, if I'm not mistaken. So it doesn't matter what type of cooperative it is, so long as it's a cooperative, it can do that.
Okay, Mike.
But the form of housing, it can be anything. It can be detached houses, it can be condominium apartments, it can be seniors related. So the type of housing isn't defined by the word cooperative or condominium.
Okay. Next question: how can someone apply for co-op housing?
I'm happy to answer that. So, housing co-ops manage their own wait lists for the units that are market rent. And currently in Toronto, I don't believe any co-ops have a wait list that's even open to put your name on it. For some of the non-market units, so the subsidized units, you would apply through the city central list for the ones that were developed under provincial programs. And for the ones that were developed under federal programs, they would manage their own subsidized list as well. And again, those wait lists would be closed. Let me give you an example of the demand. We did a small, it hasn't yet opened actually, a small expansion of a building that's part of Riverdale Co-op, so over at Queen and Broadview. And for 26 units, the city required that we have a lottery to even consider eligibility of people to move in. And we had 6,000 people put their name into that lottery. So there is an enormous demand. For the 600 units at the project at Kennedy, that were a couple of years anyway away from having anyone live in, people are calling us all day long now, basically asking how to get on the wait list. So it's wait list based is the short answer, but there's much more demand than there will be units.
And you go ahead, Mike.
So for those of you that are very patient, the home opportunities waiting list is wide open. And you just go to the website and put your name on it. But the earliest project that will be available is 2 to 3 years down the road. So we're happy to have it be open, but it's not something you can move into right away.
The next question I've got here, and actually I do want to hear a little bit more about this. So one thing I will say about the city government, Mayor Chow and Osman Malik, the deputy mayor, like this team at City Hall, they've broken ground on the number that I've been tallying up is around 2,000 units of non-market housing, of affordable housing, in less than a year, which I think is pretty remarkable. And by comparison, the Conservative provincial government has built 1,100 units in 6 years, you know, across the province. So that's not just in the city, that's in the whole province. So it is possible to get housing built. And, you know, the city, kudos, especially that project, it's a 900-unit co-op.
So it's 600 units of nonprofit co-op, and then the developer partners have the right to build another 300 units of condominium. But I want to tell you that we applied for rezoning on that site, which we needed to do in order to start even getting a building permit and all of that. And And that normal rezoning process would normally take a very long time, like months and months and months. We got our rezoning in 70 days. So the city is very motivated to get this stuff done.
Kudos. Let's give it a round of applause. That's the kind of action we need from all three levels of government to solve this housing crisis. Okay, last question from the sheets, and then we'll open it up to the floor. Will the new co-ops be rent geared to income, and how can I get into one of them?
So how you get in is to be determined. There will be some sort of waitlist process, but we in our project anyway are a long way from figuring that out. Maybe Michael's sorted his out, I don't know. The federal program does not provide for subsidy, so there will not be any CMHC funding through this program for rent geared to income. So we'll have to sort that out in some other way.
Okay.
Same thing. Does everyone know what rent geared to income is? No?
Raise your hand if you'd like an explanation of rent geared to income. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
It's exactly that. It's basically there's an assessment that is made based on the household income that you have, and if you are determined that you are eligible, then you can be put onto a wait list where you're able to achieve housing that is 30%, if I'm not mistaken, of your income more or less. The reality is that the numbers are, pretty low in terms of household income. I think I have them here. The household income limits are $53,500 for a studio, $62,500. Those are household incomes for a one-bedroom, $71,500 for a two-bedroom, and $79,000 for a three-bedroom. You also can't have more than $150,000 in assets, if I'm not mistaken. But those assets, they can be like a second vehicle or a business or something like that. If you have money in your RSPs and TFSAs, that's ineligible for that account, and so you can still be eligible.
Okay. Look, we're going to open it up to the floor. I'll walk around and I'll pass the mic to you. I ask that you not give a speech, just ask a question of our panelists, and we will open it up afterwards. At the end of the meeting, we'll have we'll just have an informal conversation. So I see a question at the back. We'll start over here.
I just have a question for you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry, it's nothing to do with cops, but I'm interested, okay?
Good.
So,
That's all that matters.
Yes. So, I'm originally from Montreal, so for people like me, it was a huge shock to come here. I arrived in 2019. Long story short, it was like a huge rat race to get in here because it was, I thought 3 months was, easy to get a housing. So what I realized is that, number one, they're so small. The units are incredibly small, and I thought that maybe as an MPP, you could say something like minimum, per unit would be 500 square feet. Okay, it doesn't make sense to have a unit that is 300. It's disgusting. It's a prison. That's number one. Number two, let me open my phone because I wrote them down. Sorry. So I was hoping that perhaps a rent control would be imposed. That will definitely, decrease homelessness. In Montreal, we have rent control. Here, I think anything that was built 2018 November, they can increase it by however they felt, and that I find that very disgusting. And I think that's number one reason why we have homelessness. And now we closed. Sorry, I thought. Sorry. The third, and also, I know that a lot of how do you call this? A realtor, they own me and then they rent it out, right? I was hoping that maybe you can implement a law that's stating that third property ownership should be highly taxed. That way, because now people think of housing as a luxury, and it's not a luxury. It's under, according to Maslow's law, it's in the very, very bottom. So it's a necessity, and I will pass it to my friend.
Okay. Actually, let me answer those questions. Okay, so So those questions, for the people who are watching online, those questions were for me, and then I'll try to respond to all of them. Let's see, the first one, rent control. So we pushed, I'm with the NDP, we've been pushing for decades for rent control. We finally got it in place, and then in 2018, the government stripped rent control away from anything built after 2018. And it's absolutely right, it's absolutely disgusting. There was two young women who were renting a place, and their landlord wanted to increase the rent by $9,000 a month. I mean, it's just, and that's legal. Like, that's legal, it's just appalling. Normally, there is rent control on anything built before 2018, and it's set usually at the rate of inflation, or last year it was 2.5%. You know, so it's a reasonable increase. It's not astronomical. Let's see, your first question was about the size of the units. This is a real challenge. You know, I think the challenge with, we need bigger units. One of the challenges that we've got now is developers build according to what's going to make the most money per square foot. And bachelor and one bedroom make the most money per square foot. So that's what they've been building. And there's been a real shortage of 2 and 3 bedroom units built. And there was an article in the Toronto Star just on the week, or yesterday, a couple days ago anyways, and they were talking about how the problem is that we've got all these bachelor and one bedrooms, but people want to live in this community with families. And it's really hard to live with, you know, a couple and children, or mom, you know, parents and children in a bachelor. Like, it's just a little too cozy, you know, or even a 1 bedroom is not adequate. You need, you know, at least 2 bedrooms for a family, and we just don't have those units. And this is part of the problem, you know. So we definitely need to mandate larger units be built, especially 2, 3, and even 4 bedroom units. And that should be part of the planning process. And you had one other question too, I think.
Real estate.
Oh, real estate. Oh, maximum. You know what? The real enemy here, and I, you know, is these real estate investment trusts. There's one company called Core, and they announced 2 years ago that they're going to buy $1.5 billion of homes in Ontario and rent them out. And this is why, like, when you talk about housing inflation, a big part of it is being driven by these corporate landlords that buy up billions of dollars worth of homes, so that when, you know, it used to be like, if I wanted to buy a home and you wanted to buy a home, and we would be bidding against each other. You're not bidding against, you know, the general, you know, your neighbor now. You're bidding against a hedge fund, and these hedge funds are traded on the stock market. That's who you're trading. And so you're right. There needs to be some controls brought in to rein them in, because we cannot be competing with this. And you're right. Housing is a human right, and it's an absolute essential part of living, you know, and of any sort of healthy existence. So we've got to make sure that it's affordable. Okay, I'll pass it for other questions. And I think what we'll do is we'll limit it to 1 question per person until we get around, then we'll come back around.
Sorry, is that people behind you who want to
And I'll
comment?
let you guys.
Oh,
It's okay,
did you want
it's okay. I'll comment after. I can comment after. We can take another question.
Yep, okay.
My question is, for the City of Toronto, for example, what needs to happen for the number of co-ops to be expanded exponentially? Do you need like free land, really cheap land? You always have to, you know, use the backyard of a church. It helps, but if you do that, it's going to be really limited. So I'm just wondering if there's any solutions to, I think the land issue is the biggest thing that, biggest challenge.
Okay. And so it's the land issue, and also how do we build co-op housing en masse to meet the needs that we have?
Well, I'll take a stab at it. We need everything. We need land, we need money. But one of the things we haven't talked about tonight is we need capacity. So, you know, Michael and Mike are both people who are doing housing development in the non-market sector. But most of the people who did it 30 years ago have retired or have died. So we in fact we're missing the people my age who are, you know, coming to the 3/4 mark of our careers have never done this work. And that is a problem in our non-market housing sector. So yes, we need land, yes, we need money, but we also need to build up a cadre of people who know how to do this, so that we don't have to keep people like Mike away from his retirement, which I know he doesn't want to do anyway, but you know, it's a bit of an issue. My boss too is in his 70s and still doing this work.
Okay, next question.
Thank you. Bit of a comment, but also a question. I live in a co-op, and we've noticed that the marginalized community is very small, and there's the majority. And I'd just like to know, how are you going to maintain equity? Because I've seen a lot of inequity that's happening for marginalized communities, and I just want to know if you can comment on that.
Good.
Go ahead.
Was that within?
Within existing co-ops or the new
Let's go
co-ops?
for both. Let's go for
Okay,
both.
new and existing co-ops. And are you talking about access to living in a co-op?
Well, what I'm referring to is how I ended up in the co-op, but also other people that look like me who try to apply for, get an application in the co-op, and it mysteriously gets lost.
Mike?
The best way to do that is I'm working with the Lawrence Heights Cooperative Development Corporation. All 5 members of that board live in Lawrence Heights. They are trying to negotiate with TCHC to redevelop their neighborhood, which is what we used to do in the old days of co-op. And every single one of those board members is a woman of color. So there will not be any issue for access to that cooperative 3,000 units worth of units to marginalized communities.
Thank you.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
do you want me to comment on that
Sure,
as
go
well?
ahead. Yeah.
So I would say, you know, co-ops, like any other housing provider in Ontario, are subject to the Human Rights Code. So there are built-in mechanisms there. But also at our federation, we're working very hard to try to foster an environment of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And we're doing things like the diversity scholarships, for example, that are providing opportunities to people people who live in co-ops, irrespective of their of what racialized group they happen to belong to pursue post-secondary education. It's actually resulted in us having a very diverse board at the CHFT level, with lots of young people and lots of young people of color serving on our boards, not just of CHFT, but of our other corporations as well. So we get it, but we're doing the best we can at the sector level.
Sorry, Chris, can I squeeze in?
Yeah, go ahead, squeeze it.
I have seen some tremendous work in cooperative development by equity groups in the Greater Toronto area. And, you know, one of the things that's really flying under the radar right now is the ways that communities are using tontine or susu or rotating savings and credit associations to be able to leverage their collective capital to be able to acquire a home and live together in a group. Right? And so these are just traditional lending and saving practices that they're using to live in these homes or to put their elderly in these homes and to make sure that they're taken care of. And that's ultimately what cooperation is all about, right? And so Principle 5 of cooperation, education, training, and information, is just making sure that we're having these discussions and that people understand how the model can be leveraged communally or formally to be able to resolve a need. At its base, that's what it's doing.
Thank you. Rita.
Anyways, you still didn't answer the question, but I can understand what the young lady over there is saying, and that's Lawrence Heights. Lawrence Heights is a very different demographic community compared to probably where she's talking about down here. I wanted to ask you a question. What's the definition of affordable housing? Like, what do you mean when you say affordable housing? What is your definition of affordable housing? That's what I want to know. Affordable for who?
Anybody? Affordable housing definition? Mike, go ahead.
So there's lots of them.
No, when you talk about affordable housing,
Okay,
like, Olivia Chow and them breaking the ground, what do you mean affordable housing? So,
okay, so Olivia Chow's definition, there's the RGI, which we already talked about.
I know rent due to income.
Okay, then there's affordable rental, which has to be below 80% of CMHC's average rent level. That's affordable housing, a certain percentage of the units. Then there's a definition for affordable ownership, which is a higher income than that. So there's multiple ones. Our definition of affordable housing, 30% of the owners have to have incomes below those that can afford 80% of the average rent level. 30% have to be people whose income is $20,000 a year higher than that. 20% is 20,000 years higher than that. And then the last 20% is everything.
And
so
these are numbers from, because right now, the way everything is going, these people can't afford these prices. When you build these new homes, none of them can afford to go in there.
Yeah, so 30% for us is people whose income is between $35,000 and $85,000 a year. How's that?
Other hands? Go ahead.
Hi, this is when new co-ops are being built, one problem I see in existing co-ops, and I hope it would be solved in new co-ops, is since co-ops are considered self-governing, there's no accountability, and for any board decisions or spending, anything like that, no accountability to the city or the government, and often taxpayer money is involved, so there should be accountability. And every governing body that I can think of does have oversight, an ombudsman or auditor general who is monitoring a governing body, and co-ops don't have that. So I would hope that would be addressed, and the other part of that is members don't have anywhere to turn when there's a problem in their co-op. For instance, a tenant can go to the landlord-tenant board if there's a dispute with their landlord regarding anything, harassment, maintenance issues, whatever. Co-op members can't do that. They have absolutely nowhere to turn except for human rights tribunal, sometimes if it applies. So I think my personal opinion is that members should be brought into under the RTA, the rental
tenancy.
Yeah, exactly. And that way, members wouldn't lose anything, and they would have rights that they don't have right now.
So, questions about co-op management? Go ahead, Celia.
So, on the issue of accountability oversight, for federal co-ops, there has been a role played by the Agency for Cooperative Housing. I see you shaking your head, so I mean, that is the formal oversight for them, and for the municipally overseen ones, then the service manager, or the city in this case, would have some role in that regard. As to how the new co-ops will operate, I don't know that that has been really revealed at this point, or possibly even contemplated, because we're quite a ways away from having any actual co-ops develop through that. But I do want to talk about the landlord-tenant board and the fact that tenants, so if you're a tenant in rental housing and you have an issue with your landlord, then you have the right to apply to the landlord-tenant board to have that issue examined by an adjudicator. Now, the landlord-tenant board is kind of broken right now, so you might wait a year or so or longer for a hearing. So it's not exactly the best solution. But When 10 years ago, the eviction process for co-ops, which had previously been in Superior Court, moved to the Landlord and Tenant Board, it was just the eviction process, and the rights afforded to tenants were not given to co-op members. The thinking, I believe, was that co-op members have internal processes to challenge their boards, so they have the right to requisition meetings, to remove directors, all of those things that are built into the bylaws of a co-op, which are like the internal, for those who don't live in co-ops, the bylaws are kind of the internal rules that co-op members agree are going to govern the way they operate. And those are established within the context of the Cooperative Corporations Act, and it has some other provisions like the possibility of applying to court under Section 121. I can't believe I still remember that. But one day I'm sure it will go, but it's still there. And so there are mechanisms, but I'm not disagreeing with you. They're not, they may not appear anyway on their face to be as effective as the right that a tenant has to go to the Landlord and Tenant Board. I think co-ops were trying to fight against losing their special character. And so they didn't want to go full on into the Residential Tenancies Act because that would maybe, they would be seen just as landlords then and not have this special character. So those are my thoughts.
Okay, we've got a few more questions around. We'll try to make the questions shorter and the answers shorter. Okay, we've got a few more people on this. Go ahead.
Yeah, I had a question about how many of the nonprofit co-ops in the GTA are part of land trusts, and kind of like how much of the land is actually in the co-op movement versus like, yeah, it not being like developer land. You mentioned some of them are, but it's all
of the 185 members, about 30 of them are owned by the land trust corporations that we administer. A number of others are actually sitting on city-owned land. And then the others are owned by the co-ops themselves, right? So there's no developer who owns land on which housing co-ops sit that I'm aware of.
Okay, next question.
Thank you. What about Villiers Island? Is there any land allocated specifically for this kind of development? Do you know, or I'm not sure if the city is advancing in their planning process to advance with that.
I don't know if anybody able to answer?
So all I can give you is that they set aside a certain number of units for affordable housing. It's not yet designated what kind, because it's so far down the road what programs will be around at that time.
So there's an opportunity?
Yes.
Okay. Next question. Introduce yourself.
Richard Carter, thank you, Chris. You asked a couple questions earlier. You asked who lives in the co-op here and who would like to live in the co-op. The question you didn't ask, is there anybody here tonight, maybe representing someone with intellectual disability, that is looking for housing, would like to consider the co-op opportunity? And how does that work when basically their only income is ODSP at the current time? They live at home, so they get the lowest amount. If they lived on their own, they would get a higher amount, but still fell far short of your $35,000 number. And I know you talked about real estate trusts for, public, like other housing. But are there any mutual funds or real estate trusts for co-op housing where people can invest? And look at my case here with my wife and I here. We have a 28-year-old child with an intellectual disability, currently not here tonight because she's at a program run by Large called Try On for Size, where she's living in an apartment for the next 4 nights, 5 days, learning how to take care of herself. She's on the Toronto housing list, 15,000 people for housing. But we're in a position that we're going to die one day. We have a home. We are leaving money to her in Henson Trust. What is being looked at in terms of helping people with intellectual disabilities get into co-op housing where they might have some estate funding that will help them, etc.? And how do we explore that? Thank you.
Anybody? Mike?
Yeah, we each have a bit to add. For specialized situations, so 39 Parliament Street is the only condominium I know of in the city that had 24-hour attendant care provided for people that were confined to wheelchairs. because they pooled their government support money to provide sufficient resources for the care that was needed, and they were generally able to pay a significant amount of their unit in cash, which then meant the carrying costs in perpetuity were quite a bit lower. So the co-op that became a condominium actually set aside office space and stuff for that function to happen. So in situations like yours, there are some pretty straightforward solutions. People that don't have family backup, it's much trickier for them.
And I can tell you that there are some co-ops that were developed with partnerships with supportive housing providers or agencies that would support folks with intellectual disabilities or other kinds of disabilities as well. There are probably no available units in those, but that kind of partnering is certainly something that the sector would be interested in doing, I think, in new developments that might be coming down the pipe.
I think, one of the things that you touched on in your question was like access to capital. I didn't quite understand the mutual fund comment, but maybe we can talk about that kind of offline on the side. I know that in the UK, there is a startup body that's called Co-op Exchange that's trying to capitalize cooperatives differently and open up kind of different exchanges and different people who are willing to put up capital for cooperative development, and that's really interesting. I'm following that kind of closely. But again, our regulatory context here in Ontario makes it very, very difficult for us to raise capital for cooperatives. Writing an offering statement, co-ops are considered a high-risk offering. This is not something that I'm going to go in depth about here with you. If you're interested, talk to me after. It's really, really hard to raise money. And when people do, they get their wrist slapped by the Financial Services Regulatory Authority of Ontario. And a lot of those people who get their wrist slaps have no idea what they're doing. So I'd be interested in talking about that after.
Thank you. Next question.
Hello. A senior co-op housing has members with cancer. How can they live with dignity and comfort with lack of government funding for capital reserve items like elevators? And where are their human rights? Thank you.
Can anybody? So if somebody's in it, and this is the situation in your co-op, and if somebody develops cancer and they're seniors, and certainly people in co-ops, because we haven't been building co-ops really since 1995, they're aging and they want to age in place. How can that be managed? How can they stay in the co-op? How can they get funding to renovate the co-op or to support them?
So at CHFT, we are working, we've established an Aging in Place committee of co-op members across our catchment area to talk about issues of aging in place, because we recognize this is, we're already in a situation where many people are living in units where they might be struggling with the activities of daily living because the unit wasn't really designed for somebody with the kind of age-related infirmity that they might be experiencing. So, I don't have a quick answer for you. I think it will be a co-op by co-op kind of endeavor to try to set aside capital money to do the accessibility upgrades that need to be done. There have at times been pots of money available at various levels of government to help with that. I don't know that there's much available right now, but it is certainly an issue that we're acutely aware of, and the same is true at CHF Canada. They're trying to think of ways to make it easier for folks to age in place.
Okay. Actually, before Michael responds, I'll take the next question. Mary? Okay.
Thank you. It's kind of a related question. Rahima and I are neighbors, and our building is full of people who are aging in place. And so what I would ask of all of you who are working on new developments, work with people to learn what to do so that the people who move into those units can age in place gracefully, with dignity. That includes not building stairs up to the front door or having a ramp
That includes wide doorways everywhere. It includes making everything accessible. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your feedback. I think that's an important consideration, especially in new builds, and maybe wasn't a consideration in the past, right? You know, there are tools that cooperatives can use and that are being explored in other provinces right now. We're looking at kind of something innovative called next-gen cooperatives, where we're looking at, you know, how cooperatives can mobilize external capital but keep the decision-making within the membership. And again, that's difficult, right? Because you're asking for a pretty tailored niche investor to be able to put up capital and achieve a return, but to give away that responsibility of being able to make those decisions. There's only probably a few investors that are willing to do that at this time, right? But it's certainly something to consider when we look at working with cooperatives who need to make some capital improvements. You need to find the money somewhere, right? It's either finding it internally, and if you don't have it internally, then it's where can we go elsewhere to be able to raise that.
Thank you. Go ahead, Celia.
I'll just say a couple of words around accessibility as well. So CMHC, the funder for a lot of affordable housing programs, including the new co-op one, have prioritized three things in all of their programs. One is affordability, one is environmental sustainability, but the third is accessibility. So they really get the problem or the issue, and they're trying to make it less of an issue for the next round of new development.
Other questions? Raise your hands. Okay, we've got a few more. We're going to go through these fairly quickly, and then I want to make sure that we have time for action items to talk about what actions we can take to make sure that we are pressuring all three levels of government to build the affordable housing that we need. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Chris. I just wanted to respond to the last questioning, just to advise you that in our co-op, we are doing accessible renovations and accommodating case by case those members who live in the co-op who need that accommodation. So it's a relatively minor items, one by one, but we've committed to doing that, and we're in a fortunate position of no longer paying a mortgage and having developed a fairly strong capital reserve that we can tap into. So it is possible within co-ops to do this. It just takes the co-op to rise up for that.
Okay, thank you.
And that's Arcadia, right?
Yeah.
Yep, Arcadia.
This is just a macro question based upon the tremendous demand that you mentioned for people wanting to get into nonprofit housing co-ops. And Mike's comment about trying to build generational wealth through options for homes, it's almost an oxymoron, because unless we can change the culture of governments and people that expect to use their home rather than other sources of retirement capital to fund their retirement, we're going to be stuck in this position for generations. It's wonderful what you're doing, and I support it wholeheartedly. Years ago, I represented, with a practice group, 850 condominium communities, and also within that group, there were 4 housing co-ops, and they wanted to update their bylaws to include some of the aspects of reserve fund planning, and they saw some benefits in condominium ownership, and there are benefits, but also in housing cooperatives, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, when you apply to become a member of a nonprofit housing corporation or cooperative, you're obliged to participate as a member of that co-op in some meaningful way in the management, maintenance, and operation of the property. And you don't see that as much in condominiums. So, that's it.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Is there anybody who wants to respond? Okay.
What role could community bonds play?
I mean, community bonds can play a role, but again, there's criteria for being able to issue community bonds. Generally, you need to have your own land, right? So if you don't have your own property that you can leverage to be able to issue community bonds, then that's not necessarily a tool in your tool belt. But again, we're sitting next to kind of the people who developed community bonds, and Tyler Campbell, and you've done tremendous work, so I don't mean to drum you up, but is there anything to add?
To be honest, although my firm was doing that work, I was not. So I feel very uncomfortable talking about it because I don't really have much to add. But maybe Mike will.
This is a case of pass the mic, right? So community bonds, for what we're doing, have a potential place. And oddly enough, we've been talking to Tapestry lately, which is a group that issues community bonds. The issue for us is $10 million would be a small issuance of community bonds. So we're not talking about the $1,000, $2,000 investments from mom and pops. We're talking about a minimum of $100,000, which is a different type of person, different type of organization. And the other difficulty is that a lot of the rental side needs preferred interest rates, which are tougher to get from a community bond source. There's easier places to pursue that. So there's a place for them, but it's peripheral.
Just a quick question regarding co-ops and your animal policies, support animals and service animals. Could you comment on that, please?
So co-ops, as I mentioned earlier, are subject to the same human rights requirement as any other housing provider or any other, in fact, business. So having a service animal would be a human rights accommodation, and like any other accommodation, a co-op might require some medical documentation to support that and so on. There are some co-ops that were developed originally as being pet-free, but a service animal is not a pet, right? So those pet-free bylaws would have to be set aside if somebody had an animal that they needed to support them through some kind of disability. Does that answer your question? Yes. Okay.
Good. Were there other questions? Anybody else with questions? No? Okay. I want to move into, we've got 15 minutes left, I want to move into action items. And, you know, one of them, I'm going to actually start with a question for the panel. If I had a group of 10 people, 10 couples, or 10 individuals who wanted to create a co-op, like, you know, could not afford an individual unit themselves, but wanted to buy something and make, you know, create their own co-op, how could they go about it? Is this a possibility? Mike?
Okay. I mean, anything is possible, right? Like, I mean, if I was to speak about my specific project that I'm working on in the Bayview and Finch area of North York, it started as, you know, 3 families primarily who were kind of the last remnants of what's called Willowdale Evangelical Church, right? The developers were circling, they really wanted the land. They had already sold off a third of their property to the developer who put in townhomes next door. And they were encountering the same types of challenges as, you know, their grandparents were getting old and they didn't necessarily know where to put them. There was, you know, long-term care was really expensive. And there was this plot of land, and these 3 families were the, you know, sole congregants and members of this church, and so they were like, well, can we look at cooperative housing as an option, right? So that is an option. I mean, benefit to them is that they have a piece of land that they can work with and a foundation that they can mobilize those funds through. And obviously it's a value add, right? That's a really important part. But, you know, I would say, Specifically in the co-op development that I'm doing, it is kind of, you know, with those religious grounds, or doing what I call religious institution conversions, right? Where it's, we have this plot of land, we have developers circling. How do we find a solution that works for the congregants or the community members where we can build affordable housing on that lot? So I know that's kind of niche, but, and I wouldn't say my recommendation is to go find a church that has dwindling membership. You know, that's probably not what I would recommend you do. But in their instance, you know, they had a common goal of building residential housing and making sure that there was space for the community for generations to come. And it's just a real honor to be able to serve them and to have that be a reality.
Okay. Let's see. So we want to get to, actually, Jackie, go ahead.
I just want to ask you a question. So Alexander Park, they were owned by housing, right? And then they changed into a co-op. How were they able to do that? Do you know about that?
I can.
Whoops. Alexander Park. It was under.
Yeah, it's now called Atkinson Co-op, and I know a tiny bit about it. My boss Tom Clement would be very excited to answer this question because he was the one who really shepherded all that through. So yeah, they somehow managed to work with TCH, the Toronto Community Housing Corporation, to convince them to basically allow the tenants to become co-op members and to self-govern under the Cooperative Corporations Act. And it's been a very successful co-op in the last 20 years, I think, since its conversion. I don't know the mechanics of how that happened, but I do know that Tom is very proud of that because it really is quite a groundbreaking achievement. Yeah.
So there, yeah, that's an example. For people who don't know it, Atkinson Co-op is just up the street on just off of Bathurst Street. And it was a TCHC building that converted into a co-op, I think it was around 2002. Yeah. And so, like, just to provide people with some context, we have 18 co-ops in Spadina, Fort York. Almost all of them, except that one, date to pre-1995. You know, so we have not been building co-ops in almost 30 years. And now there's some federal funding available. And this is the first real opportunity to get involved in building some co-ops. And so we want to create the momentum to make sure that we get shovels in the ground, you know, before there's an election and a change of government and a change of, you know, priorities. Because we need co-op housing. And, you know, many of you who are in this room live in those co-ops that were built pre-1995. The Atkinson Co-op, I think, is the only one that I am aware of. There was a few units in one of the condo towers that was also a co-op in this riding that opened, you know, maybe 10 years ago. But other than that, there's been almost nothing built. So we need to get co-op housing built. And I would say if you look at our riding, like you look at Bathurst Keep right here, we've got Arcadia Co-op, Harbour Channel Co-op, Windward Co-op, Harborside Co-op. So all these co-ops right over here. There's condominiums, there's for-profit condos, there's beautiful townhouses over there, and there's, you know, it's a mixed income. There's a TCHC building as well. It's a mixed income community, and it's an incredibly healthy community, and everybody comes to this waterfront community center to meet, right? So we need mixed income communities, and co-ops are part of that, and part of that solution. Same thing over in the St. Lawrence market area. You know, they've got co-ops, a number of co-ops, they've got, you know, for-profit condos, and they've got TCHC buildings. So all income levels are living in the same community, and it's an incredibly healthy community. And I see people from that area nodding. So we know what the solution is. How do we get the political will? So I'll put this over to the panelists. How do we create the political will to get the shovels in the ground while this federal funding is available?
We mobilize. I think it's not a hard question to answer. We need everyone to work together to fulfill this need that we have that is so collective. We need housing, okay? And I mean it when I say my agenda tonight is go join a board, go get involved. And I mean, for those already in cooperative housing, congratulations, you're doing great work, keep it up. But, you know, for those who are kind of co-op curious, you know, take take my card, you know, glad to have a conversation and get involved, because it really is a powerful movement. Once you eventually get the bug, you just can't get rid of it.
Maybe there could be like a follow-up email with links.
Yeah, Michael, can you,
Resources, because I don't have any
yeah, okay, so Michael,
We
if
need
they're
access to
interested,
resources.
if they're interested in joining this group that you're talking about, how do they do it? What is the website or what?
Yeah, I mean, so there's resources available on our website. Our website is impact-on.com, but I'm also more than happy to email them to you directly, or I can email them to Chris and or Nancy, and they can send them on to you if you're interested in learning more, reading more.
So what we'll do is we're going to create a summary of notes from this meeting, and we'll include the links for people who want to get involved, and we'll have a number of action items that people can take, you know, to do that. So I saw a few hands here.
If you,
Jackie.
yeah, if you get it together, Chris, we can put it on our site, Q&A.
Okay, good. Yeah. Mary, you had a comment?
Yeah, I couldn't write fast enough to write down the email address.
Impact-on.com.
Thank you.
Great. Yes.
Because there's this awareness of all these vacant shoeboxes of the condos on the site, and the example of like the 3 people, not a church-based community or whatever, is it possible to, like, you know, if you got 10 people and you're like, we're just gonna buy the 3 floors of a condo building and turn it into those 3 floors into a cooperative, is that in the realm of possibilities, or is it always that we have to, we're looking for this new constructions and stuff, or is that like, because of the structures owned by this, you know, the for-profit condo or whatever, that's not even feasible? I'm just like, there's just so much real estate sitting in the sky available.
So, I don't know about condos, although I know that sometimes new condo developments, and Chris spoke of the one on York Street, they provide some co-op units as a benefit to the city. So we have acquired co-op units through new condo development sites, and we are always talking to developers who are interested maybe in giving us more, although nothing is crystallized yet. But one of the things we haven't talked about tonight is the city's multi-unit residential acquisition program, or MURA. And the MURA program is designed to ensure that rental buildings that are at risk of being bought up by developers, demolished, and replaced by condominium towers, and of course the people who were living there being displaced. These units are now, the city is encouraging nonprofits and co-ops to buy those in order to preserve the housing for the people who live there. And they are the city is putting money on the line for that, $200,000 a unit, for buildings, I believe, up to 40 units or something. So we're not talking huge units, huge buildings. But this is a very exciting program, and lots of housing has already been saved as a result of that. Because obviously the cheapest housing is the stuff we already have, exactly. So that's those are a couple of ideas.
What was the acronym you said, sorry?
The MURA program, M-U-R-A.
M-U-R-A.
That's right.
So I've been dying for a question. Well, let me put some figures out for you that might be useful. One, government in Toronto. Toronto is a unique city. 150,000 units worth of land is controlled by government within boundaries of the city of Toronto. So that's interesting. It's an opportunity that's quite exciting. But understand the scale of the problem. You know, we tend to get lost in little steps. And little steps aren't going to do it. Because historically what's happened is when in 1995 they stopped building affordable housing, we still needed 10,000 units a year. We still need 10,000 units a year. So we are now 300,000 units behind, which is why you see the crisis going on out there. In order to change that situation, the City of Toronto has to deliver 25,000 units a year of affordable housing. 25,000. We've got the best mayor we've ever had to generate housing. We've got the best council supporting that mayor, And the best they can do with subsidies is 5,000 to 6,000 units a year. So we're still falling behind by 4,000 units a year. So we can all sit here chittering and chattering about what's going on while Rome burns, right? So what you can do as individuals when you get near a politician is to say, no more land should be going to the private sector. We have a grant and subsidy-free mechanism to generate 20,000 units a year, and we've got the land to do it, so why aren't we? The interesting thing is if we start generating 25,000 units a year and we're producing the amount of housing that the city needs, all of a sudden we don't care how long it lasts as affordable, which is one of the issues that comes up around ownership. If we're producing the need and satisfying the need, the issue starts to go away. And that seems to be bedeviling a lot of staff. Oddly enough, most politicians I talk to get it. We need that much. But we can't do it with grants and subsidies. And so if we keep saying we're going to solve 25,000 a year with the best council and the best mayor where we're doing 6,000, clearly we have to be willing to do both. It's not either or, but we should be willing to do both. And we have to set a proper target. The target isn't 4,000 or 5,000 a year, it's 25. And we have to figure out how to get there, and that means using all the tools that the co-op sector has to offer.
We're gonna wrap up. I'll ask the panelists 1 minute each to wrap up, and then I'll say a few words to close and talk about a few other actions that people can take, and then we can just disperse and have some casual conversations. So, Michael, go ahead.
I was just going to say that was a mic drop moment, Mike. So thank you very much for that. That was well delivered. No, thank you so much for listening, for participating in this discussion. It really is something that needs more visibility. So next time you want to put on something like this, bring a friend, and we can kind of grow the community of those who are curious and getting involved in cooperatives.
Ditto and ditto. But I will say the power is really in the co-op sector. Before the Kennedy project was before the Planning and Housing Committee back in early June, I think. We mobilized our membership, so among our 50,000 online, we mobilized and got 800 people to sign an online petition in 2 weeks. And so we have a lot of people, and people are powerful when they act collectively. So I think for those of you who are in co-ops, keep on doing what you're doing to get politicians' attention, and thank you for Chris for making this an issue in your riding.
Okay, thank you. Michael? Last word.
There is solutions if the group wants to work together towards it.
Okay, so we're gonna collate our notes that we took from this evening's discussion. We'll create a brief, like a one-pager, and then we'll include some ways that you can sign up. We'll include the impact on ON, link as well. We'll include the Toronto Housing Federation link as well. And then we're going to we've got a petition. We'll include that, and we're looking to build more affordable housing. We need all kinds of affordable housing. Certainly co-ops are one form that we need a lot more of, but we need TCHC housing, we need supportive housing, we need housing, as you were talking about earlier, for people with disabilities or mental illness. We need, everybody needs a home, and we can do it, we know how to do it, we've done it in the past, we just have to get the political will to do it again, and that's what this is going to be about. We'll send out those petitions, please share them out with all of your friends, or if you're on social media, share it out with your social media friends. The other thing that we'll include, and this is not related to housing, but it is about public sector, because this is the thing that has shocked me most being in MPP for the last 6 years is the power of corporations over our government. And all of the wealth our GDP per capita keeps growing. Our GDP per capita has gone up by 50% over the last 40 years, but all of the wealth has gone to the top 1%, and the median income has been flatlined. We need, and all of our public assets are being pillaged. you know, including our public lands, like as Mike was saying, we should not be turning our public lands over to for-profit corporations, you know, to build condos for profit. Like all those, the Ontario line stations, those should all be affordable housing that's built above. The entire building should be affordable housing. And we've got to push for that. So that's part of our petition as well. But the other public sector, you know, assets that are being pillaged, Ontario Place and the Science Center. We've got a petition to reopen the Science Center. Please share that out as well. We need to create a huge movement because this government is determined to forge ahead. And with enough political pressure, we can get them to backtrack and reopen the Science Center, which, just like housing, is a public asset that everybody, you know, we own collectively, just like the public lands, and we need to get that reopened again. So thank you so much. I want to give one, ask everybody, there's a few people who put this on, and the main one is Nancy. Nancy is the organizer for this event. Nancy. And also from our office, we've got Karen, who's helping out. We've got Janice and Bella, who are helping out tonight. And then our three panelists, give them a round of applause, everybody. And then you're applauding them. You're not just applauding for, you know, them coming and spending a couple of hours with us tonight. You're applauding actually for decades of support and work to build affordable housing in this province. So let's give them a bigger round of applause. Thank you all for your advocacy. We're going to we'll just, you know, mingle now. We've got some snacks and juice at the back. I recommend Aussie Bites. They're very delicious. Brownies are good too. Anyways, have a great night. Thank you all for coming out.
Thank you.